Why do some people become great, while others, with the same 24 hours, the same human limitations, and sometimes even greater opportunities, remain ordinary? History gives us thousands of names. Kings who conquered, philosophers who challenged civilizations, scientists who changed our understanding of reality, artists whose work survived centuries. But when we look closely at their lives, something becomes clear. Greatness was rarely given to them. It was forged through discipline, through failure, through loneliness, and through the decision to become more than they were yesterday. Consider Alexander the Great. He inherited a kingdom, but from his teacher, Aristotle, he inherited something even more powerful, a vision larger than the world he already knew. Alexander did not simply ask, "What do I possess?" He asked, "How far can I go?" And that question matters, because the limits of your life often begin as limits in your imagination. If you believe your world ends at the boundaries around you, you may never attempt to cross them. Greatness begins when you dare to imagine beyond them. But vision alone is not enough. You must also learn to govern yourself. Look at Marcus Aurelius. He was emperor of Rome. He commanded armies and possessed enormous power. Yet in his private writings, he repeatedly reminded himself to control anger, resist arrogance, accept hardship, and fulfill his duty. A man who could command an empire spent his life learning to command himself. Because the highest form of power is not power over others. It is power over yourself. Then there was Socrates. He had no empire, no army, no fortune. His weapon was a question. He walked through Athens asking, "What is justice? What is courage? What makes a good life?" His questions made people uncomfortable because they forced them to examine themselves. Eventually, Athens condemned him to death. He had the opportunity to escape. But Socrates chose to remain faithful to the principles he had spent his life defending. His greatness was not in conquering others. It was in refusing to betray himself. Then we find Leonardo da Vinci, painter, engineer, anatomist, inventor, observer. Leonardo refused to look at the world casually. He studied birds to understand flight, water to understand movement, the human body to understand life. His greatness grew from curiosity disciplined by observation. And this is what we often forget. We admire the finished genius, but forget the student who spent years learning. The same principle appears in Isaac Newton. Newton did not simply accept the universe as it appeared. He searched for the laws beneath it. He questioned, observed, calculated, and returned to problems again and again. Greatness often looks remarkably ordinary while it is being created. A person alone with a book, a person practicing a skill, a person failing and beginning again. No applause, no audience, no guarantee, just the work. And perhaps that is why we misunderstand great people. We imagine they were born different, but they were human. They had fear, they experienced failure, they had weaknesses. They simply demanded more from themselves. Alexander teaches us to expand our vision. Marcus Aurelius teaches self-mastery. Socrates teaches us to question. Leonardo teaches curiosity. Newton teaches relentless pursuit. Different lives, different centuries, different forms of greatness. Yet beneath them all is the same principle. Greatness is built before it is recognized. It begins when you stop asking, "What can life give me?" and begin asking, "What can I become?" That question changes the direction of a life. Because once you decide that your existence should mean something, comfort is no longer enough. Excuses are no longer enough. Approval is no longer enough. Every day becomes training. Every failure becomes instruction. Every difficulty becomes resistance. And every decision becomes a vote for the person you are becoming. You already have the same 24 hours that every great person had. You cannot control how much time you were given, but you can decide what you will build with it. And that is where the journey toward greatness begins. Because greatness is not simply about what you achieve. It is about who you become while achieving it. But becoming great is not free. Every extraordinary life eventually demands a price, and that is where our journey continues. Every great life has a price. We see the victory, we see the masterpiece. We see the name remembered by history, but we rarely see what came before it. The years of struggle, the failures, the sacrifices, the loneliness. The first price of greatness is comfort. Consider Hannibal Barca. When he marched towards Rome, he chose a path that seemed almost impossible. He crossed the Alps with an army, supplies, horses, and war elephants. The mountains were not simply an obstacle. They were a test of commitment. Because extraordinary goals eventually take you somewhere uncomfortable. And when that happens, most people ask, why is this happening to me? A person pursuing greatness asks, what can this difficulty make me? Hardship can break you, but it can also refine you. Then there is Nikola Tesla. His imagination was far ahead of his time. He envisioned machines and systems before others could see their possibilities. But his path was also marked by isolation, financial struggles, rivalry, and disappointment. Tesla reminds us that sometimes your vision will not be understood. There will be moments when nobody sees what you see, and that can be lonely. But solitude can become a workshop. It gives you time to think without the noise of the crowd. Another figure who understood intellectual isolation was Friedrich Nietzsche. He challenged comfortable assumptions about morality, weakness, conformity, and human potential. His ideas were not immediately accepted, but he continued to write and think. His central challenge was not simply to become successful. It was to overcome yourself. That is one of the hardest battles a person can fight. Not against another man, against the weaker version of yourself. The version that says, tomorrow, I'm not ready, it is too difficult. What will people think? Every great transformation requires you to leave some version of yourself behind. Then look at Abraham Lincoln. His life was filled with setbacks, political defeats, business failure, personal tragedy. Yet he continued. His life was not a straight line toward greatness. It was a series of falls followed by another attempt to stand. And that teaches us something important. Failure does not disqualify you. Sometimes failure is the training. Then there was Winston Churchill. During Britain's darkest days, he understood that courage does not mean certainty of victory. Sometimes courage simply means refusing to surrender. You may not know whether your plan will succeed. You may not know whether people will recognize your work. You may not know whether tomorrow will be easier, but you can still continue. And then there is Miyamoto Musashi. For Musashi, mastery was not an event, it was a way of life. Study, practice, observation, discipline, adaptation, again and again. That is how extraordinary ability is created. Not through one heroic moment, but through thousands of ordinary moments performed with unusual consistency. One page, 1 hour, one difficult task, one promise kept, repeated until character becomes stronger than impulse. This is why the world often misunderstands greatness. The world sees the summit. It does not see the climb. It sees the artist's masterpiece, not the discarded attempts. It sees the scientist's discovery, not the experiments that failed. It sees the leader, not the years when nobody believed in him. Greatness requires the ability to work without applause, to improve without recognition, to continue without certainty, because if your motivation depends entirely on being admired, then other people's approval controls you, and a person controlled by approval is never completely free. But suffering alone does not create greatness. Pain must be transformed into discipline, failure into wisdom, solitude into reflection, difficulty into strength. Otherwise, suffering is simply suffering. The real question is therefore not, how much do you want greatness? It is, what are you willing to give up for it? Comfort, approval, distraction, immediate pleasure. The easier version of yourself, because every choice is shaping you, whether you realize it or not. But even discipline and sacrifice are not enough. A person can become powerful and still become empty. So the final question remains, what should your greatness serve? Because the greatest lives do not end with the person who built them. They leave something behind. And that is where the final chapter begins. If greatness is built through vision and purchased through sacrifice, then what is it ultimately for? Because becoming powerful is not the same as becoming great. History gives us men who gained enormous power and used it to destroy. And it gives us others who possessed little, yet changed generations. So perhaps greatness is not measured by how high you rise. Perhaps it is measured by what becomes better because you rose. Consider Socrates once more. He left no empire, no fortune, no monument built in his name. What he left was a method of thinking, a habit of questioning, a challenge to examine one's own life. More than 2,000 years later, people are still asking his questions. That is another kind of immortality, not living forever in the body, but continuing to live through ideas. Then consider Leonardo da Vinci. His curiosity crossed boundaries. Art became science. Observation became invention. His notebooks reveal a mind unwilling to accept that knowledge belonged inside separate boxes. His legacy reminds us, do not become merely successful at one thing. Become deeply curious about the world itself. And look at Marcus Aurelius. He possessed extraordinary power, yet his philosophy repeatedly returned to duty. Do what is right. Control yourself. Serve your role. Accept what you cannot control. His greatness was not simply that he became emperor. It was that he attempted to remain human while carrying enormous power. Then there are people whose greatness came through creation. Shakespeare transformed human experience into language, love, jealousy, ambition, betrayal, fear, power. Centuries later, his characters still feel human because he understood something timeless. Human nature changes slowly. Technology changes. Empires disappear. But the inner struggles of human beings remain remarkably familiar. That is why great work survives its creator. It speaks to something larger than one lifetime. But perhaps one of the clearest examples is Nelson Mandela. He spent decades in prison. He emerged with an opportunity for revenge. Yet he chose reconciliation. His greatness was not simply enduring imprisonment. It was what he decided to become afterward. Because adversity gives you a choice. It can make you bitter, or it can make you wiser. It can make you seek revenge, or it can deepen your understanding of humanity. And this is the final transformation. The purpose of greatness is not domination. It is contribution. Not merely asking, how powerful can I become? But what can I build with that power? Not, how many people can admire me? But, how many lives can become better because I existed? This changes the entire meaning of ambition. Your education can become a tool to serve. Your discipline can become a source of reliability. Your wealth can become a means of creation. Your knowledge can become something you teach. Your strength can become protection. Your voice can become courage for someone who has none. That is when greatness becomes meaningful. Because a life devoted only to itself eventually becomes small, no matter how impressive it looks from the outside. But a life that creates something beyond itself can continue long after the person is gone. Think of the people we have followed through this journey. Alexander expanded his vision. Marcus Aurelius mastered himself. Socrates questioned. Leonardo explored. Newton discovered. Hannibal endured. Tesla imagined. Lincoln persisted. Churchill refused to surrender. Musashi pursued mastery. Mandela transformed suffering into reconciliation. They were not perfect. They did not all share the same morality, goals, or methods. And we should not romanticize every decision they made. Their value to us is not that we should become copies of them. It is that their lives reveal different possibilities of the human spirit. Vision, discipline, curiosity, courage, resilience, self-mastery, purpose. And perhaps that is the real art of becoming great. You do not need to become Alexander. You do not need to become Marcus Aurelius. You do not need to become Newton. You need to discover what greatness means for your own life. Maybe your battlefield is not a battlefield. Maybe it is your education, your family, your craft, your character, your weakness, your fear, your unfinished work. The mountain you must climb may exist entirely inside you, and nobody may applaud the climb. But climb anyway, because one day you will look back and realize that greatness was never one dramatic moment. It was every small decision that slowly changed who you were. The book you chose to read, the temptation you chose to resist, the failure you chose to survive, the responsibility you chose to accept, the difficult path you chose when the easy one was available. Piece by piece, you built yourself. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson history can give us. Greatness is not a gift reserved for a chosen few. It is a direction, a discipline, a responsibility, a lifelong act of becoming. You may never become famous. You may never have a statue. Your name may never appear in a history book. And yet your life can still be great. Because greatness was never truly about being remembered. It was about becoming worthy of the life you were given. So do not ask whether the world will remember you. Ask something harder. When your life is over, will you be able to say that you became everything you were capable of becoming? That is the art. That is the struggle. And that is the journey toward greatness.